This is an update regarding the case that is currently being requested for dismissal. Uh, this is regarding the threats and extremist activity which has been reported over various years. So this is being recorded. Uh, the screen being recorded is a device which has already been openly exposed and made accessible to authorities for multiple years now. This device is also compromised and has undergone various security operations, from recovering data and analyzing data for intrusions. All of these events have been documented, and they have been saved and recorded on multiple storage devices in various locations, including decentralized storage options on different blockchains and places beyond the simple clear net, or the basic transparent internet, with standard HTTP. So these are excerpts from communications which have already been sent off regarding reports which were reported. Uh, these things were reported to various authorities, including the woman uh, involved in the case for the torture. And so, to summarize, there were a variety of wrongdoings which were reported, which were directly uh, relevant for public safety and national security. Um, some of the events involved in this include a self-described extremist group, which had been reported going all the way back in 2020. There was further contact from other individuals who had made direct or indirect contact um, with such groups, which was more or less unprovoked, which provided further implication as to active and current dangers and threats. Now, one of the things, one of the other things this involves as well. So after these reports were made, it was falsified um, and misrepresented that these things were, one, unprovable, but two, also things that should not be believed. All of the things reported in these documents were verifiable. A lot of these events occurred on camera with video recordings, which typically were saved for at least 3 years. Now, the woman, the authority that these were directly reported to, some of these events, she refused, and her entire team refused to ever check any of the video evidence, even though a team working side by side with them at the same time from the beginning had actually already been in contact with the manager of an apartment building where some of this video evidence existed. That same apartment building made it difficult to recover the video evidence, and also caused some financial issues with things that they had already been in the wrong on, which are actually inside of my actual credit reports and disputes, which tend to be saved for at least 5 years. Um, Now it should be just getting to the point where it's coming up on 5 years for those credit reports and documents to possibly no longer be saved, particularly with Credit Karma, where some of these um, reportings regarding these agencies and these security issues involving an apartment unit were disputed and discussed with. Now, part of what happened during the initial reporting of these occurrences was not only did the woman refuse to report them to her agency or to her superiors um, in a proper manner, but she also went above and beyond, and with her team questioned they questioned that if such great harm to society had been occurring and such dangers were present, that as long as things were intact for the team themselves, it might provide an insight that there may be a greater margin of error where they could um, instill their own harm. So, after these reports were made regarding these threats and dangers and these self reported terror groups in a self reported terror cell, this individual went above and beyond and chose to attempt to cause car accidents in the city of Houston, particularly on the highways such as 610 and 288, in the particularly fastest locations of these highways on the straightways. So the woman intentionally tried to prevent myself from safely traveling, prevent myself from being able to be awake and to not be distracted while traveling, and also put me in a position where I was forced to have to travel relatively regularly. Um, so a lot of this evidence has already been um, communicated to various individuals. Um, this evidence has also been published, some of it, especially with regards to the context of the woman's own endangerment and intentional harm and battery and assaults. This evidence itself uh, was particularly published on public blockchains. So that way, the compromised computing devices and the compromised communications with individuals such as lawyers would not prevent the evidence itself from being retained. And so that the legitimate threat to society that these women constituted would not simply be allowed to be shoved under the rug and ignored despite all of the threats and attempts at harm and battery, abduction, and otherwise done to myself and presented to myself. This is a URL down here for Accord, which is a decentralized hosting service on Arweave, which is now sunset and no longer active. Um, there is a vault which had quite a few different documents online. Um, it is not easily accessible now, but the data is on the blockchain, and this is the transaction in the background on the actual blockchain explorer. Now, part of these threats as well constitute a group which has threatened the city council in the town that this campaign of attacks from this woman started in. Um, the town itself was warned, as well as other groups of people who were being targeted by demographic and who were threatened based on their protected class status for both religion and race. Um, they were both, or there were multiple entities who were warned. The woman herself also, against her team's own warnings and discouragement, took up on some of these reports for extremist violence and their plans for extremist violence, and attempted to use them for her own attacks. Um, Now, part of what has occurred is this woman has been interrupting with communications uh, to private individuals as well as legal services. So, one of the things that has occurred is this individual has started a campaign which he has now passed off like a baton to another group of SS7 attacks, which attacked the back end of my phone communications. So between my phone and the cell tower, there's interference, and there's likely interference uh, from the cell tower into the provider's network as well. This has caused recent issues with my case, which I have just requested to have dismissed without prejudice for my ability to actually contact lawyers. So I've had phone calls with lawyers recently. Um, some of my phone calls will ring maybe for half a ring, maybe for half a second, a full second, and stop with no continued ringing. There are other times in the past years where my phone has been on a call, which has dropped off, but remained active on the other side of the phone call, either in a group call or an individual call, where people believed that I was still on the line, and some people even believed that I was still actively speaking or engaging. And the reverse is true as well, with other parties being dropped off the line and myself being kept on. This has continued on with my lawyers, actually, or my legal uh, counsel consulting, where when requesting legal counsel or speaking to lawyers I've already previously engaged with, they have had their communications cut off. One lawyer in particular recently had a child, was contacted after meeting with the lawyer, and after she was contacted following our last discussion over the phone, she gave the implication that she was disinterested in getting involved in the case at all due to her recent starting of a family, as if there was a physical threat or mortal threat present due to the individuals that the woman, the defendant in the case filed, decided to bring in. Now, I have evidence of all of these events, including the reported extremist violence and terror cells, going back to 2020. The initial report started in 2020, and recently, getting closer to 2025, have picked up significantly. And in this year alone, things have drastically increased in severity, as is stated in the case. Let's see, there is quite a bit of information here that I am being relatively careful to sift through, as there are names, addresses, and other identifiable information. Now, part of what this woman has done is this woman has attacked a project I was working on, actually multiple. One of these projects, the founder of the project a was working on getting a novel, low-cost, affordable cancer treatment put onto the market. Now, this novel cancer treatment was estimated to, let's pull up a calculator. This novel cancer treatment was estimated to come in at around, let's see, this novel cancer treatment was estimated to come in at around a 5% efficacy rate in terms of how many cases it would potentially be completely effective for, to the point of remission, and 100% in terms of the yearly save time, in terms of the extra year of life that you typically measure cancer patient treatments with. Now, if we were to look at the yearly rate, let's see. So this is the U.S., United States yearly cancer deaths. And this treatment was low cost enough to be able to also be low cost in developing nations and nations with much, much cheaper economies. Um, Even nations with small economies that were small, cheap economies. So, cheap economies with low buying power and low scale, to the effect that they would likely not be able to make a deal outside of something backed by a central bank. Um, let's see. So, in 2025, so in 2025, there are 618,000. So obviously, the rate increases every year. It's increasing exponentially, just like with population. But let's see, we would say 2020 U.S. cancer deaths. Now, this may have been 2020, 2021. The specific dates and times are all documented. Okay, so in 2020, there are 606,000 people. So if we take our 5% rate that this was estimated to be efficacious for, and let's do 600, let's do 606, it's closer to 666, which makes a lot more sense of a number in terms of matching this case. So we get about 30,000. So this was the number that I came up with before. So we have, and this figure is provided by the American Cancer Society, Centers for Disease Control. So this doesn't necessarily mean that cancer was completely determined to be the cause, but by whatever criteria that this organization uses, it's determined to be a foundational cause of the death, or the primary cause. Now, we can take this, and so just for reference, it takes around 10 to 15,000 deaths to constitute a massacre historically. Massacre minimum number. But that's just a massacre within a year. So you take this 30,000. So every year, so every 3 years, they're a little over 3 years, about something like, so if you take this divided by 12, I think it's something like 14 months, right? So 2,500, let's see, 2,500. We're gonna do, so we got about 40 months. And what is that? It's not an extra four, not an extra two, an extra 4 months. I get you 200,000. But if we were going to say yearly death of increase, so it's on average about 1.7. So 1.7 deaths, or 1.7 deaths year over year increase compounded. So when you take that 30K number and you do times 1.07, and we're gonna say to the fifth, right? To the fifth. Well, we're going into the 6th year. Let's say we're 3.5 years into this. 1.07 to the 3.5. Oh, sorry, it's not 1.07. Let's go. 1.0. 1.017 going to say to the 3.5. So we're about 6% up. Right. Let's see. Compound interest calculator. So initially we start out with 30,300 monthly contribution. Interest rate of and we're 3.5 and compounded annually. 3.3. So let's see. Six, 39, 31. So in a couple of years, we should be at 32,000 per year. We started off at 30,000. So let's see. So this would be, our interest rate would be 100, right? Wouldn't it? Well, let's look at our numbers. So we got 30,300, right? 3,300 plus. And I will add that this cancer treatment was already tested. Its inventor had cancer and was actively using it for himself. This was not just some random, um, probabilistically effective, or I guess everything is probabilistically effective. This was not just some home remedy or some treatment that just happened to either align with things naturally declining or that just happened to trip some sort of biological tripwire and result in that individual getting better. This was developed by somebody who did the entire scientist, had an entire lab set up at his home, who had some form of tongue cancer, had gone through surgeries, lost pieces of his tongue. Somebody who had been through the full gamut of everything that occurs with these diseases, and someone who spent basically all of their free time figuring out a solution that they were poised to share with the world and the nation. So now let's see. Let's add this all up and see what we get. 30. And then, and so my work beyond this has actually been, I was already focused in areas like this. I was attempting to assist with cancer treatment distribution and this woman's torture and harassment and business interference, which was particularly aimed at stopping this. Now, this cancer in particular, this cancer treatment was particularly disrupted by the woman's supervisor, whom she encouraged and created the environment for her to be incentivized or agitated to do this. Let's add our last number. We're adding 31, 30. Okay, let's go back through this. So this was, let's see, 30.3 plus 30.6 plus 30.9 plus 31.2, 2 plus 31.4, 31.3, 3, let's just say minus that, 62466. Okay, so right now we're looking at around 154,000 deaths in the US alone. When you actually add it all up, if you were to go yearly, let's see, global annual deaths. Let's say, okay, let's see. Global annual cancer deaths for, let's start this at 2021 to 2020. Let's see. So when we break this down into annual deaths, so in the US alone, we're looking at 150, between 150 up to 160,000. And that 5% number on the treatment efficacy was the low end. Now, there's a chance, maybe that treatment is only half as effective in the real world as it was predicted to be. Maybe it was only 20%. But if you go 10% of this is over the minimum threshold of being considered an historical massacre. Now, one of the things that has also occurred here is the woman leading this team and the other people she has brought in to enact all this violence. Part of what they have done is cause concern and reach up to ears over their heads to manufacture what's considered fragmented evidence and to intentionally try and generate these very manufactured artificial reports to debase myself, to prevent these reports from getting anywhere, to prevent themselves from being ever held liable for any damage, and to effectively just silence everything. So part of that actually resulted in them multiple times through the woman's team herself, which she is the team leader of, and the other team she's brought in, is directly running into other intelligence and clandestine operations that exist outside of their agencies and entities that they work for, and completely outside of their actual direct chain of command. To the point that they have assessed random things as being concerning and of interest, going all the way to the council itself. But they have not actually ever dug directly into the raw data, including the things that should have been verified years ago and validated, even if it was just to disprove a claim. Let's see. So when you look at it globally, this is what we're looking at, right? So let's start up a chart. I had a depth chart before. We can make a depth chart on the spreadsheets. Let's see. And in doing this woman has also caused hundreds of thousands, going probably closer to the millions now, of damages across businesses, things that I've owned or things that I had a vested stake in for either equity or that I contracted with, and not just in the US, but also across other countries. I believe one company in particular, there were about $180,000 to $220,000 worth of damages, maybe $225,000 worth of blockchain damages based in, I believe, Singapore. either Singapore or Indonesia. Let's see. Let's just call this the massacre chart. Now, keep you in mind that these, all these sorts of nefarious actions are given this general blanket acceptance by the public, as well as with these individual charters for these entities in terms of their actual corporate bodies. So, all right, let's. Okay, let's start the depth chart. So these are going to be these are going to be, this is US, this is US, this is global. Now, we're going to go, and I'll also add that my legal advising on this started back some years ago from some former, or maybe at the time, people who were official legal counsel in the legal sides of one of these publicly known intelligence agencies. You could think of your agencies, the regular feds, if you will. Even down to the point of doing things to, or rather stating things directly to attempt to pique interest, even to the point of, at times, possibly embarrassing or angering the group which the woman led. All of this is documented. So even questions as to that, which were repeatedly asked, were documented, written down. And there's also been some evidence destruction. My former laptop was destroyed. I was informed that the capability to blow out capacitors was present. I actually have a camera. Let's see. I actually have a camera somewhere. Now, this camera had a plastic body. It was a Reolink camera. It had a plastic body, and basically its internal board was exposed electromagnetically. The same is true with my laptop. My laptop, which is actually documented in one of these notes that I have pulled up before, this laptop had a plastic body as well. The camera was brand new, just stopped working. The laptop, I actually heard the capacitor pop. It actually blew out while I was using it and then turned off. I heard an explosion inside of the case. Now, let's see. So when we do our test, we're going to count the year, right? So we're going to count the, let's just count by actual dates. This was 2021, and so you'll be able to actually count this for your own state. Maybe these should actually be reversed, right? So Okay. And we could do states here, we can do whatever. So when we actually check this, let's see. We can get rid of this and we can just take the raw numbers themselves. I was just showing that to show the acceleration. And we can assume that these deaths have likely gone up as things have gotten more expensive, become more unhealthy, and people are generally just stressed out more. Um, let's see if that's actually the case. So 9.9 million. One. All right. Say diagnosed, it said. Okay, let's see. Global should be deaths by year. All right. Let's see. We just want to take these from the same data source. Maybe it's just the wrong. Let's see. Okay, so there we go. Cancers. Cancers World 2021. We have this many. So we don't even have cancer deaths beyond this, do we? Causes of death. Causes of death in 2024 only goes up to 2021. Cancer deaths 2022. 3. It's interesting, it's so hard to find that global number. The top results are all outdated. It's probably because people more or less search for the particular kind they have. Or for treatment more than they do general information. Cancer statistics. Now, these numbers are also partially inflated just due to the time of year when this was disrupted. Because more likely than not, treatment would have started being distributed around 2022, probably at least maybe Q1 2022. Of course, all of these have to be taken with a grain of salt. It is interesting. It's harder to find this through an AI. You'd think that they would use a centralized source. This doesn't seem like the kind of statistic it will be hard to find anything on. Let's see. Yearly cancer deaths. Because we know what it is in the US, right? We can punch this in. So we know that this is 30,300. 30,300. Let's see. Find yearly cancer deaths in US 2021 to 2024. And it also might be because some of these countries require a lot more estimating to actually, either estimating or investigating to get any decent number on. So, yeah, that's a projection, an estimate. We use this as our, let's say 2021, it was this, right? So if we were to chart this, These are our numbers. Let's see. Insert chart. So this would be like let's go from the save potential to saved, and let's see. So well, actually, let's move this up here. Insert chart, and want a cumulative, like a line chart. Like all right. So this is what we look like. Wow, it looks pretty bad on the chart. I guess as the population ages, this should increase in terms of the actual change in the rate itself. But yeah, so if you were to break it down by these numbers, things haven't increased as much as they were expected to. So instead of that 154 number, we're looking at 122,000, which is still drastic. So anything over 10,000 is the low end of a massacre. So with maybe 10% of projected effectiveness with the real world treatment results, this might be still underdoing the massacre, but coming up on a massacre in, I guess, maybe 1 to 2 years. Let's see the U.S. cancer death rate compared to the average. So globally, we might be cutting back on that rate, might be cutting back a significant amount. So let's say if we do a global projection, if we were to do a global projection, let's say a global projection for saved US basis minus 0.319 minus 31.9%. I guess you could do 91 point. Let's see what this is. 91.7 divided by 23.6. So let's see. And this will be global rate versus US. Global death rate versus US. And we do a global all right, when we do the global rate versus the US, we get this percentage number. So we would say inflation 2021 and we're going to punch this number in, and obviously it's very hard to get an accurate population number for all countries. Let's see, equals this. Let's see, equals this times global population, and this would be, let's see, this would be so global population 2021, this 2022, so 2021 all right, so this would be equals well, let's see, equals this times 0.05 times, we should have save rate. Let's see, treatment yearly save. So now we do yearly lives saved. What do we get? Well, let's see. 0.05. Okay. B7. All right. So now, let's see. When we actually go and do let's see. Okay. So now we can do a projection. We can figure out the yearly projected deaths per year just based on U.S. deaths alone. So just basing it on the global population difference and the actual, rather the number, and the difference in the average yearly cancer death rate, which might be different due to other morbidity factors or just better overall yearly outcomes. Now let's see what this is. Now all this should really be adjusted into some sort of quality of life adjusted year to get a true representation. Once we start factoring in the quality of life adjusted year, these numbers will look a lot worse because then we're not just factoring the yearly deaths in, we're also factoring all the other complications and results. And then you can also do add the social data of the actual impact of more than just the patient themselves. So once you start factoring in families, parents, financial support, and the other factors, you can draw a lot more numbers out of this and get a lot bigger picture of overall what the impact of this is. I haven't done that yet. And I haven't even, this is the first time I'm doing a proper global assessment and adjustment with the actual numbers that are out there. So, okay, let's see. And then we know 2024 is a projection year. These results are not finalized enough, I guess, to have what would be considered a more accurate estimate, but that's just what we have to work with. So now let's see. We're going to take our number here, I'm gonna multiply this by the average lives saved by the global death rate. And then we get a number of just how many people. So what does this say? Let's see, format number. This was global population, right? So this was the global population. So what we should actually be doing is we should be, let's see, we want to take our this was the overall global population. Let's see, U.S. population per year. Right, we're actually going to adjust these population numbers based on okay, there we go. US. We're going to adjust this population based on the yearly numbers. 332, 100, 334, 20, and 336, 810, and this is not a proper statistical analysis. It's not using consistent data sources or methods of even obtaining the information. But this is definitely how you could start to build out, and maybe we'll start to build out a full framework and structure for damage assessment. We would also have to do this for the financial damage assessment, as a lot of these projects that have been impacted by this torture and harassment and interference were things that were designed to increase access to finance, especially in lower income situations, either people of lower income within their country or countries with smaller economies, cheaper economies, less buying power in the global market as well. So it would be interesting across at least 3 to 4 different software projects and fintech projects we will be able to make these assessments for. At least, even with the restrictions of any non-disclosure agreements and confidential information. Now, let's see. So, what we're doing here, U.S. population, right? So we're doing, first we're going to take, so we're going to take the deaths, right? All right, let's see, so okay, so let's see. We want to divide our U.S. saved, we're going to divide our U.S. saved by the total population. Going to, maybe this should be multiplied. Everything gets multiplied in a way. Let's see. So global population. So we're multiplying these, right? And then we don't even need that rate, and we can do times this. That's that proper number. So we're taking saved over total. We're multiplying that by a number, and then we're multiplying that against the total population. Okay, so this is our accurate number. When we do this, we will be looking at, so red, we're not moving that. And So if we were to take that and do the same thing, so I don't even know if we can scale this. Yeah, the numbers are off this chart, so we need two separate charts for this. So now the other strange thing is I presume that even though the working relationship with the person involved in the with the treatment looking to be involved to get it to market was destroyed, I did expect that given the amount of snooping and interaction with other individuals and the invasiveness, rather unnecessary pleasure, entertainment driven invasiveness of these social interactions and the non consensual nature of them, I did expect that the drug would still be, the drug itself would be of interest to help get to market, even outside of my own involvement entirely. And I did suspect that somebody may be trying to get me out of position just to effectively replace me and pretty much steal that role of being able to facilitate that. And from my knowledge, it appears that that entire idea was entirely wrong. After the working relationship was destroyed regarding myself and my potential involvement with this treatment, there was no particular, there was no alternative, there was no remedy for the situation as a whole that was ever presented or made known to myself. The team responsible for it more or less tucked it under the rug. I know that it was presented to a manager at the very least. At least the original manager. Subsequent managers all got a very watered down version of the reporting on these occurrences. And I was deliberately and very explicitly kept out of, for the most part, almost all of these discussions. Save for a few moments where I might be called on. This is why I come with these data, the evidence, to not have people rely on my word, a human, but rather very hard, concrete, and easily interpretable information. Because everything else, more or less, just nonsense and noise at the end of the day, especially given the average person. Especially even up in these spaces with these officers and security individuals, they still claim that they themselves, especially in this generation, are just average, normal people, which horrifyingly is actually the case, which it should not be. Let's see. Need to. We're only going down to E13, and that cleans our chart right up. Okay, so now we can blow this up. We can put this onto their own charts. Let's see, preventable cancer deaths global. Um, hmm. That did not work. Hmm. There we go. Access title. Hmm. So do we not have these years anymore? Maybe we should just build a new chart out of all of this. All right. There we go. US on top. Yeah. One of the other things that occurred throughout this time is a software project. We had an individual contracted to do some work who was at one point in time determined to be rather likely to potentially be some sort of foreign agent. And this was brought up and suspected. And at the time, we were effectively running over some kind of watch by the team that the extremist activity was reported to. And we had calls and communications interfered with. But the strange thing was basically none of our calls with this individual were ever interfered with. They interfered with calls from other people who we had much more familiar knowledge on and personal connections to. They interrupted things, they tampered with things that were completely non-problematic. There were things involving major entertainment entities, major sports teams, things of that nature, and even some major companies and even entire like more governing body type of entities. And this individual believed to be a Chinese national for some reason was never interfered with. And to any of our awareness in that particular project was never really looked into, even though we suspected with all the invasiveness that that individual would have been weeded out at some point. We only after really got we only got suspicious to a point where the work started slowing up in certain ways, and the individual had meetings that they were constantly unwilling or statedly unprepared to be visibly present for, and then on camera, they ended up being in some sort of strange concrete room that seemingly just had a table on it. Just very, very barren, almost like an interrogation room or something like that. Could have just been a concrete house, but and that individual would go on to more or less attempt some level of contract or business extortion. What might be defined as business harassment. Um, like failure to complete work, failure to deliver, and asking for more money, things like that. Now let's see. Let's access chart title. What is it? Whoa, let's see. Preventable. Whoa. Yeah. There are a variety of other things as well. There are all kinds of strange choices made for some of this interference, going from interacting with vulnerable populations, you know, using people to commit physical attacks, getting involved in charitable organizations, particularly nonprofits. There's sexual things, very, very strange. And the record of this was extended to go far beyond this current campaign of attacks. There's people behind this gone to immense lengths, gone through immense measures to maintain this raid. So I guess the only plus you could look at, if you were the type to consider that a plus, which I guess it looks like quite a few people nowadays who are, looks like, yeah, I guess you could say that the rates more or less look the same. One doesn't really look particularly better or worse. It's almost like the numbers are too large for there to even be a meaningful. Like the charts can't even have meaning. They don't serve much of a purpose. They don't seem to have much of a value. Seems like looking at the chart versus looking at the actual tables, all it really is seeming to cause is, I guess you would get a more inaccurate picture, imprecise picture, looking at the charts compared to looking at the numbers themselves. The only thing they really tell you is how it stacks up year over year. We could go much more in depth with this. We could put this into something like a visualization platform and have this broken down state by state, even county by county, or the deaths are reported by county to the CDC. I guess they may no longer be reported to the CDC. I'm not exactly sure what's gone on recently there. We could get a much more accurate picture in something like Tableau. where view, we'd be able to view what the actual map looks like of the country in terms of how exactly each state and major city or county would be impacted, especially if you have an area with far more elderly residents or certain towns, cities that have had these chemical disasters and air quality disasters. We'd be able to really map this out. So that might be the next thing to do when looking at this. Maybe it should be called something like the damage report. We can get charts like this. That might be a lot more helpful and interesting to look at. And I guess this also comes with AI now, so we'll be able to just query almost any question you could have about anything related to this data that we could feed into it. So that might be the next thing.